Surprise!
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Valley Bible Podcast.
Bible Studies Podcast,
Valley Bible Studies Podcast. You think I know it by
We're
now.
3 episodes in. You'd think you'd know the branding.
Right. And we're really excited about this one because this is kind of a surprise episode or bonus. Well, yeah, bonus.
Surprise, bonus, extra.
A bonus episode that we're really excited about because Matthew has so much stuff to unpack.
Yeah, we didn't really do a great job last time.
And we told you, here's the thing.
Through it.
Here's the thing. We said in our introductory video that
we're not going to cover everything.
Well, that we're going to go down rabbit holes, which is exactly what we did with that first episode with Matthew.
We're true to our word.
Oh yeah, I mean we're a lot of things, but we're not liars. So what we plan on doing with this bonus episode is finishing Matthew, and we're going to start in chapter 8.
Now we're not going to do as much of a here's this and then here's this and then here's this as we did with the first 7 chapters because we basically just went through them straight. We each have a couple things from the rest of it that we wanted to cover. Make sure that we covered in the time that we had. And
that's kind of what makes this a bonus episode because it's not traditional in the sense of what we're going to be doing with the other ones, but rather, we're going to give our viewpoints on a couple of things, give our thoughts, and kind of just go right into it.
We're going to be skipping around a little more than typical.
Yeah.
But just the stuff that we think is interesting.
So, I mean, for instance, we're going to start in Matthew chapter 10. So when I say we start in Matthew chapter 8, that's kind of true.
We're covering 8 through 28.
But starting in chapter 10.
With a few specific things from 8 to 28.
So, okay.
We're starting in 10.
Yeah, with that being said, in Matthew chapter 10, this is one of the things that I pointed out that I think is discussion worthy.
Mm-hmm.
And you see in verses 13 and 14. Let's read that together, shall we?
10, 13, and 14?
Chapter 10, verses 13 and 14.
Very nice.
I'm in Matthew chapter 16. That kind of makes that difficult.
Just whenever.
Whenever you're ready, folks. So Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is talking to his disciples. And so he's getting them ready to go out and preach. And in verses 13 and 14, he reads this. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust from your feet. Now, so just for everyone knows, I'm reading from the New King James. That's my favorite translation. I use other translations for study purposes and yada, yada, yada. But that's kind of my go-to is New King James.
I typically have an ESV. That's what I preach from. But I have New King James with me today.
Okay.
So
nice. So in that, Jesus is kind of warning the 12 disciples of being, how do I go about this? That they're going to be rejected. Some people are going to listen, some people are not. And we run into this constantly.
All the time.
And we've seen this even more now with our social media outreach.
Oh yeah, it's been interesting. It's been an interesting couple weeks
because there are some people who they like the videos, they're engaged, they want to know more, they want to see more, and
there are some who are not,
and there are some that really, really don't want any part of it.
Mm-hmm. And
Luke, how often is it when you go and you find somebody that you meet, you really like them, you think they're a really nice person, but I mean, this applies to everybody, but then you try to teach them the gospel, you try to teach them Jesus, and they're just not about it.
Yep.
They hear you. Some are going to be respectful, some are not. But
it's almost worse when they are. Not because respect is a bad thing. We all want to be respectful and be respected, but this person is a good person. They have their head on straight. They have morals, they have manners, they're kind to other people, and you know that Jesus is the thing that they need in the center of that to make it all come together.
Right, it would tie everything together.
Right.
And you want
but they're just not interested, and it's so frustrating when you have, it's not about I'm better than you because I know Jesus. I don't think that's the way it works, but it is frustrating when, they're such a good person.
Yeah.
They just don't have that thing at the center of their lives that that they need because you need it.
And to us, it would make so much sense.
Yeah.
Why not?
It just clicks.
Because the ones that are rude and, abrasive about it, I mean, like you said, it's never easy to be told, no, I don't want to know about Jesus.
That's easier and harder in some ways when they're disrespectful and just not nice about it.
I agree. But the ones that you can tell genuinely care about other people and genuinely care about you.
That's tough. And
they say no to it. You're like, okay, they said no.
And Jesus knows in this passage, because his disciples are good guys, right? He picked them for a reason. He picked them because they have their heads on straight and because they have the ability to do what he's asking them to do. He knows they're going to have the same drawbacks when people who are nice to them, people who, aren't actively chasing them out with torches or anything, but they're not accepting the gospel either. That's tough.
It is tough. And so when that person is there and they're saying no, in the back of your head, you're still thinking, no, I can do this. I can do I can bring them to Christ. They can accept it. I know they can, which that's true. Everyone can. Everyone has the ability and opportunity to obey the gospel.
There's a old preacher from the late 1800s, early 1900s. His name was Batsell Barrett Baxter. Triple B. No one actually calls him that. I just called him Triple B. And what Triple B said, what Brother Baxter said was, everybody is open to the gospel at some point. And the best way that the church can fulfill the Great Commission is being on guard when that point comes.
Right. And so those people that do reject, that we really, really, really think they can, when they are ready, we need to be ready.
Right.
But right here, what we're seeing is that Jesus is telling them, if they're not going to accept, you can't kill yourself over this. You can't spend all of your time on this, because how many people are you missing? Right?
Well, this is a preview for Mark, which is next week, but
stay tuned.
Beginning of Mark, I think it's right at the end of chapter 1. Jesus he's tired because he's had a lot on his mind and he's been helping a lot of people. So he goes away for a minute and the disciples come and find him, and he says, you sort of get this image of him getting up, shaking the dust off and saying, okay, let's go, because it's for this purpose that I came. He says, let's go to the next village and teach, because there's more people that need the gospel, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
That's sort of the same message that he's giving the disciples here. If you can't reach the people that in the town where you are right now, or on the day that you're preaching right now, maybe it's just not their time.
Yeah.
They will be ready, because everybody's going to be ready at least once, but maybe it's not their time, or maybe you're not the one who's geared the correct way. You can't say it the right way for them.
Right.
But there's somebody else who will come along that can.
Yeah, and so you can't exert any more energy than you already have.
Right.
And you need to be able to dust off, go somewhere else, and exert that energy there.
Right.
The second part of this in in Matthew chapter 10 is that, so Jesus is telling the disciples, there are going to be people that will accept, there are some people that will deny, and then there's going to be some people that are really going to hate you.
A lot.
Like a lot. They're going to drive you out. They're going to persecute you like you wouldn't believe.
You'll be thrown in prison. You'll be tempted with things. You'll be tempted to sell your fellow Christians out so that you're not thrown in prison. You will be... So he straight up says, I don't think it's here, but he tells them at some point, some of you are going to die for the cause. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. And so there are some people that say, today that we're persecuted. And in a sense we are, but we can't compare our persecution.
At least not in the United States.
No.
Because there are still places on Earth where this happens. Where there are people who do face,
prison
imprisonment, possible, maybe not death, but
severe punishment.
Severe punishment for the sake of the gospel.
But like you said here,
but it's hard for us in the United States in the 21st century to actually realize that.
To say our persecution and their persecution, those ideas are synonymous, because they're not. But he tells the disciples, you're going to get persecuted.
Right.
And the disciples are probably in their heads okay, well, what do we do when we do get persecuted? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Because
this is another case where it's very telling that he says when, not if. Right. We talked about that last time.
Yeah.
There are times when Jesus says when, not if. Some of those are really good, and some of them are I'm going to be persecuted. It's not an option. It's going to happen.
And so when he says that, some people, so in verse 17 of chapter 10, beware of them. They're going to deliver you to the counselors. They're going to scourge you. They're going to make sure that you get in trouble. And then You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake. Notice it's for Jesus' sake.
Not for ours.
Okay. And they're going to ask for a testimony. They're going to ask you for answers. They're going to probably, dog you with all kinds of questions. And one of the things that I want to note is in verse 19. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. Verse 20, for it is not you who speaks, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. In this original, what he's saying right here is, don't worry about it. What you're going to say is going to come to you because the Spirit of the Father is going to give it to you. Mm-hmm. When I first read this is what went through my mind. How often do we worry about who's speaking rather than what's being said? Mm. And when that happens, we get so caught up in these gospel speakers.
Man, he's a great speaker.
What?
Or even worse, somebody comes along, you're like, eh. Like before they've even said anything. Just because they have a style that maybe doesn't...
It might not click with you.
Right. But it's wrong to just, before they even say anything, you're like, eh.
Yeah, and if you're listening, don't act like you haven't done that. See somebody...
We both have.
You see a gospel preacher walk up to the pulpit and you go, oh boy.
Oh, good.
Yeah, this is going to be great. That's terrible on our part.
It's human nature.
It is. But we get really caught up in the ones that are really, really good. Mm-hmm. And we have to be very careful with the idea of getting caught up in them. Mm-hmm. Us getting excited. And it's fine to get excited about good gospel preachers because that's what they are. Mm-hmm. Good gospel preachers. And it's exciting. But why are we there? Why are we wanting to listen to them? Is it because we really want to listen to them? Or is it because we want to listen to how they tell us God's word?
Right.
And we see this happening in the rest of the world with all different types of churches of it. The messages being given are how is it going to make me feel? Mm-hmm. How is this guy going to make me feel?
Am I going to leave encouraged?
Right. Oh, I didn't really get much out of that. It
wasn't yours to get out of.
That message wasn't for me.
Well, but here's the thing. And it affects preaching, and it also affects the modern conception of worship in general. Worship's not for us.
No.
Worship is us towards God.
It's our service.
Right.
We are serving God.
Right.
And so
if you want to get technical with it and use the Greek word, proskuneo. Pros, towards, kuneo means to kiss. So the usual word that is the most common word that the New Testament uses for worship means basically to blow a kiss towards God. Which is like the spiritual implication behind that is it's not there for me to get something out of it. Now, Hebrews especially also talks about edification. One of the byproducts of worship is you feel edified and you feel encouraged when you're with fellow Christians. But the point is, what can I offer to God through this?
And some of the one of the reasons that we do feel good after a service, think about when you give a gift to a friend. Mm-hmm. That makes you feel pretty good because you see that their reaction.
Especially if it's one that will mean something to them.
Especially if it's something very meaningful. Maybe you wrote them a very nice note, or maybe you got them a gift that was sentimental, or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel good, but you didn't get anything out of it. You're the one that gave something to them.
But it makes you feel better.
But it makes you feel really good to see that it made them happy.
And see the product of your relationship with that person.
Right. And
that's the edification of worship, but it's our relationship with God.
And so if we go into a worship service thinking, how is this going to make me feel? Yikes. Luke, that's a pretty one-sided relationship. Mm-hmm. But those are my thoughts on Matthew chapter 10. Just those two sections of it. Matthew chapter 10 has a whole lot more to offer than just that. But
so does every book and every chapter and every passage.
And what we're going to do,
about.
You're right. But that was just my thought of, we get so caught up in who's talking rather than what they're talking about and why it's being talked about.
Right. And Jesus is sort of the perfect person to introduce that concept because imagine, like, people did that to him, which is a little, like, meta to think about, but, like, even to Jesus, who was God, what he's saying as he tells the disciples that is, even when you're listening to me, don't get caught up in the fact that it's me saying it.
Because that's not what it's about.
It's about what I'm saying.
And so that's what makes preaching so special, so to speak, because...
But also so, I don't want to say hard. Well, preaching is hard in some ways.
Yeah.
But it's a responsibility.
Oh, no
Because
doubt.
when you're the one preaching or teaching or whatever, or like when we're doing this podcast, whatever it is where you're trying to, spread the gospel in whatever form, it's not about you, and it's not about us. It's about what we're saying.
Right.
That's a responsibility that needs to be taken seriously.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Nice.
Very nice. Thanks, man.
Yeah. All right, my turn. Matthew chapter 13 is where we're going next. Matthew chapter 13 is the parable, the first parable discourse.
I hope you guys can hear the pages turning. That's a lovely sound.
It's a nice sound. Especially in the Bible, but just pages turning is a nice sound.
I agree.
So, Matthew chapter 13. Jesus as a teacher is known for his parables. He's known as sort of the parable guy. He can take physical, earthly symbols and put a spiritual meaning behind them in ways that basically no one else has ever been able to do, appropriately since he's the Son of God. Matthew 13's parables illustrate, to me, a distinction that's important. So a lot of times when we think about parables, one of the things that we like to do is, parables are in the form of a story most of the time, and they have different elements. There are different characters. There are different things that are important to the story.
There's a lot to dissect.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the temptations is, I'm going to find a specific meaning for everything here. Like every detail, every element of the parable, there's a specific meaning for each of them. Sometimes that's true, and sometimes it isn't. The reason I say that is because there are only 2 parables that Jesus ever taught that he actually explains. So most of them he just says, and you're meant to get the meaning from what he says and whatever the context around it is.
But at the same time, the reason he did that is because it's understandable.
Right. Yeah. It's something that the common people who weren't the Pharisees and the Sadducees could also understand. There are only 2 that he ever explains. The 2 that he explains are the first 2 here in Matthew chapter 13. You have the parable of the sower, or the parable of the seed, whichever you want to call it, and you have the parable of the wheat and the weeds, or the parable of the wheat and tares if you're using King James or New King James. Those are the 2 where after he says it, the disciples take him aside and say, what does that mean? Because they have no idea. And those are the 2 where Jesus says, okay, this part means this part means this part means this. And that's it. He does like 30 more, but those are the only 2 that he ever does that with. The rest of the ones here in chapter 13, so you've got 7, and sort of a bonus 8th. Bonus parable for the bonus episode. So the big 2 are parable of the sower, parable of the wheat and tares. Then you've got parable of the mustard seed, parable of the leaven, the parable of the hidden treasure, the parable of the pearl of great price, the parable of the dragnet, and the sort of secret bonus one is in verse 52, which is sometimes called the parable of the householder or house owner. So the first 2, parable of the sower. This is one that a lot of people are very familiar with. My apologies. There are 4 different kinds of soils. So the sower is sowing the seed. There are 4 different kinds of soils. There's the path, and as soon as the seed falls on the path, birds come and eat it. There's the rocky ground. It goes down, it shoots its roots down very quickly, but since there's no water, it dries up. There's the thorny ground. It goes down, it shoots its roots in, but as the plant starts to come up, it's choked out by the thorns and by the weeds. And there's the good ground, which is it comes up, it bears fruit, some 30-fold, some 60-fold, some 100-fold. And that parable is that's one of the ones where each thing has a different meaning. What's the impact of the word in my life? And what the impact of the word in my life is determined by how I receive it from the get-go. If I'm not willing to receive it at all, I'm the pathway. The devil's just going to take it right out of there. My ears are closed. End of story. If I'm able to receive it at first, but then as soon as something comes up, I'm out. Like as soon as temptation or persecution or something like that comes up, I'm out. I'm the rocky ground. It's going to shoot its roots down, but it's not going to last. If I'm willing to accept it for a time, but eventually the cares of the world choke it out before I can bear fruit, or if I'm not bearing fruit at all, thorny ground, because there's stuff competing with the word in my life. If I'm willing to receive it, if I'm willing to cultivate it, if I'm willing to work towards bearing fruit regardless of what else is going on, I'm going to bear fruit. Which it's sort of based on the ask and you will receive concept. Like if you're willing to work for it, the gospel's going to bear fruit in your life. That's just the way that it works. Second parable, the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds. It's another one that's based on the idea of sowing. So the master, who's supposed to be God, sends workers out into the field. They plant a bunch of wheat to be harvested the next season. Master's enemy sends his own little minions into the field. They plant a bunch of weeds so that when by the time the next harvest is up, the tares have ingrown with the wheat, and now in order to, like, you're going to have to go through a much more difficult process of separating out before you can enjoy wheat. So the servants come to the master and they're like, "Hey, yo, somebody messed with the wheat." And it's potentially, some of it's potentially ruined, and the one that's not ruined is going to have to be, like, laboriously separated out over the course of a bunch of time.
Word of the day, laboriously.
Thank you.
Nice.
And the master says, okay. Which a lot of masters back then wouldn't have done, because if, like, this is harvest. It's a big deal. This is how the village gets fed.
This is how you live.
Yeah, this is how you live through winter. And if that field over there is so overgrown with weeds that, you know, is it even worth saving at that point? A lot of people who have that much to go on are going to say, we can probably make it. You know, it's not, this wheat isn't so important that we have to go through the process of separating out and seeing what can be saved. This master says, no, we do. And so Jesus' interpretation of that is, the master's God, Satan's the enemy, and the tares that he's thrown in are the unfaithful, the false teachers, and the temptations that try and drag away the wheat, which is the faithful. And God says, even in the midst of all of that, even with all the different problems that the world has, you are worth saving. You are worth working through the weeds and the tares and all the things that are wrong with the world. The kingdom of God is about the message that you are worth saving. Now, put those two together, and it's hard to explain exactly, but I think the joint message when you put them together is, you're worth saving, and so is everyone else, regardless of the initial response. Right? Like, the person who's sowing the seed in the parable of the sower knows that some of it's not going to work, right? Like, he knows that he's sowing on different types of ground and that some of it's not going to come up or bear fruit or whatever. He still sows it. Even when he knows there are thorns, even when he knows he's sowing on the path, he still sows it, because even if, how to put
There's
this?
always a chance.
There's always a chance. And that chance is worth taking on everybody all the time.
Yeah.
You are worth saving regardless of who you are, regardless of what circumstances you find the gospel in.
Well, and regardless of what's been done in the past.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what has been done, what is happening, because no matter how, think about it like this, no matter how thorny your past may be, no matter how thorny your life may be now, there's always the chance and there's always the opportunity.
Right. But the wheat and the tares parable ends when the master says, okay, we're going to gather the wheat. We're going to go through the process. The weeds are all going to be burned. Throw them into the fire.
Foreshadowing,
yeah. So there is this reality of judgment, right? And we don't like to talk about that because it scares us and because it turns people off sometimes.
Okay, well, I don't know about you, but that's scary.
It is scary.
You should be scared.
Like judgment is a real thing.
Yeah.
But the message is, yes, the wicked are going to be judged in the end. That's true. They're still worth taking the chance on now.
1,000%.
Everybody is worth the chance of becoming a member of the kingdom of God, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what your life looks like, and regardless of the circumstances in which you receive the gospel the first time, which I think is part of what Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 1. Because Paul in Philippians 1 is like, he's in prison, and he's writing to Philippi, and he says, there are some people around me who I'm hearing about who are teaching the Bible for the good reasons, who are teaching the gospel for the good reasons. There are some people around me who are teaching it because they figured out that if you are a gospel preacher, you get a lot of attention, and you get a lot of praise, and you get a lot of different opinions about you that bolster your ego. Mm-hmm. And he says, what does that matter? Only that the gospel is preached.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what he's talking about, is it doesn't matter what circumstances you hear the gospel in. The gospel is still the gospel, and you're still worth what Jesus did.
And the thing is, to look at this from the other perspective of that person that's preaching it, like, why are they preaching it? Yes, the gospel is being preached, but that person preaching it is going to be, they're going to be judged on their own circumstances. Mm-hmm. They're going to be judged on their actions, right? Because, so say I'm the one hearing the gospel. Mm-hmm. The preacher's doing it because I'm seeing him, I'm hearing what he's saying, and to him, it's all about him.
Right.
Wow, look at all these people looking at me. Look at how great I'm doing. Oh, they're saying I'm doing so well. Da 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 da. But to me, I'm hearing him, and guess what? I'm not thinking about him. I'm thinking, this is the gospel.
Right.
So there's two different.
It goes back to what you said about Matthew 10.
Yeah, there's two very different perspectives.
It's not the circumstances. It's about this is the gospel of Jesus.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I had more to say about the shorter parables, so I'll just drop the two summary statements that I came up with, and then this can be a study that you do on your own in Matthew 13. But the other six, so the mustard seed, the leaven, those two are about the gospel is more powerful than you can possibly imagine. It can do more than you can think. And the rest of them, the last 4 or 5, are the gospel is more valuable than you can possibly think. Like, all of those parables are basically, this person finds the kingdom of God and is willing to throw away everything else that is of value to them for the kingdom of God. Which, that truth only works based on what we've already said. The fact that you are worth saving, the fact that you are valuable, and the fact that it's the kingdom of God that gives you that value.
Luke, to you, why do you think Jesus spoke in parables?
Do you want the textbook answer, or do you want...
No, that's why I said Luke.
Okay. Textbook answer goes back to Isaiah, but my answer is because... Well, I think there's a uniqueness aspect. There were other rabbis that spoke in parables around Jesus' time, but Jesus does it in a very unique way. And there's also the appeal to the common person. Like, not everybody in Jesus' day memorized Deuteronomy. There were people who did.
The majority of people now don't.
Well, yeah. But, like, even in Jesus' day, there were people who did. Like, there were kids who went to Hebrew school, and by age 8... like, most of your homework was copying verses of the Torah while an adult read them to you at the same time. Because they're trying to reinforce the memory.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to do that. And the Pharisaical mindset places a value on you based on how much of the law you know and how close to being okay in the eyes of the law you are. Jesus doesn't. And the parables are one of the way that he proves that everybody is deserving of the gospel.
I 1,000% agree with you, but one of the things is that, so we will never be able to understand heaven and the power and majesty that God has
Right.
until we're there, until after judgment. And one of the reasons that Jesus speaks in these parables, that people speak in parables, is because if they spoke it the way they understood, if Jesus spoke it the way he understood it, we would never know what in the world is going on.
Jesus is like Einstein teaching third grade.
Yeah. And so he's I don't want to say dumbing it down.
Terms, right.
Yeah, I don't want to say he's dumbing it down, but he's making it to where everyone can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're told that heaven's going to be paved with streets of gold, more likely than not, it's probably not. But that's how we can understand it. That's how we can see it. Because we know what gold looks like. We know the value of gold.
Mm-hmm.
But more likely than not, it's not going to look like that.
It's not literally paved
It's
with
not
gold.
literally
But
paved with
in a
gold.
spiritual sense, it's valuable. It reflects
Exactly.
light. It's attractive to us.
Right.
Those kinds of things. And it provides for us.
Yep. You ready to move on to points,
16. Your turn again.
Points 2 for us?
We had 2 each going in.
Yeah.
We're 30 minutes in and we've done 1 each. So bear with us.
And I think these other 2 are going to go pretty quick. So in Matthew chapter 16, we have the discussion between Jesus and Peter. And Jesus asks him, hey, Peter, who do...
Copyright strike again.
So we don't know. Well, there's no direct implication. Anyway, in Matthew chapter 16, he asked Peter, he asked the disciples, all of them, who do men say that I am? Right? Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And a lot of them were like, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And then he goes, okay, who do you say that I am? And that's when Peter speaks up and he says, you're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And so Jesus then tells him, blessed are you. Because he's the one that spoke up.
Right. Just to note this, like every commentary you read who is trying to do what we're trying to do and summarize the Gospels will tell you Matthew 16 is the watershed moment.
Yeah.
Like in the book of Matthew, this is where the turn is taken from a public ministry towards the road to Jerusalem.
Yep.
This is the watershed moment.
This is kind of the groundbreaking of this process. And so he says to Peter, hey, blessed are you, man. For flesh and blood have not revealed this to you yet, but my Father who is in heaven. And so he says, so in verses 18 and 19, he tells him 2 big things, right? Verse 18, I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. All right, so I want to give a shout out to one of Westside's members, Paul Mays, because Brother Paul, he gives us in a video something that really stuck out to me. And there are 2 things that are pointed out here, and it comes to Jesus's one church, the one church. There are so many different types of churches in this world. And what it boils down to is that because people can't agree. People want to do what they think is right. Jesus wants one church. He wants unity. That is what he desires, and that's what he put into place.
Read John 17 and think unity, and it's right there.
Yeah, and
read Ephesians chapter 2 and think unity, and it's right there.
That's what he wants. And so for the people that think that we can have all these different types of Christian churches and be united, there's no way. There's no way. And so Jesus establishes his one church, and he does it so listen to this. So he says, I will build my church, singular, possessive. The gates of Hades shall not prevail against it, singular and permanent.
Nice.
It's one church. And
it's Jesus' one church.
And it belongs to Christ. That's who it belongs to. And so with this, we have this outlook of what Jesus has given us and the outlook of what the rest of the world sees. And what the world sees with this verse, okay? You are Peter, and on this rock. Luke, what's the rock?
Do you want my answer? Or
Luke, that's why I said Luke. We're doing this again, man.
Okay. The rock is the truth that Jesus is the Christ.
It's the confession that he just made.
Right.
Peter said, you are the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so Christ is saying, okay, based on this rock, because what's a rock?
Something solid.
It's something
it's a foundation.
Firm. It's a firm foundation.
Right.
And so he says to him, based on this rock, I will build whose church?
Jesus says my church.
My church. Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Let's go to verse 19. And I will give you
the keys.
The keys. Okay? The keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will also be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you this. Luke, if I'm going to give you the keys to success,
yay.
What does that mean?
I'm going to succeed eventually, but it's not success itself.
Right. So if I'm giving you the keys to success, that means I'm giving you the tools and the
opportunity.
opportunity.
A list of principles.
Right. I'm giving you the tools and the opportunity.
If you were giving me the keys to success, literally, that would be you giving me like $1 million in cash and 10,000 million followers. But when you say keys to success, it's like, here are the principles. Here are the tools.
Here's what you need.
Here's the way.
Here's what you need to succeed.
Right.
Jesus gives Peter the keys to heaven. Here's what you need
to get there.
To get to heaven. We have those same keys. But so you said it before we started the pod. Peter gave the first sermon.
Acts chapter 2, yes.
He gave that first sermon. Guess what those keys did then?
Open the door.
It opened the door so that we could go through it. And there's so many different interpretations on this.
You can also pair this with, he gives him the keys, but Jesus says in John chapter 10, I am the door.
Mm-hmm.
Peter has the keys. Jesus is still the door. Jesus is still the way in, regardless of who's opening the door.
We're not going to go through heaven or get to heaven through Peter.
Right.
The only way we get to heaven is through Christ.
Because he's the one who owns the church.
Exactly. Because he just solidified it right there in Matthew chapter 16.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many interpretations on this so what happens is, okay, upon this rock, people say, well, the rock, that's Peter.
No. Well, you got to think. And part of it is tied up in the name because the word Peter means rock. Like it's a word in Greek that means rock. But that's also his nickname.
Right.
Like if Andrew had said it, Andrew's nickname would be Peter.
Exactly.
Peter's name is Simon.
It's
That's
Simon.
His birth name.
Simon Bar-Jonah.
Simon Bar-Jonah.
Yep.
If Andrew had said it, Andrew's nickname would be Peter.
He'd be Peter.
If Matthew had said it, his nickname would be Peter.
And so,
Simon Peter, because he's the one who made the confession.
And so there's that misconception, number one, that it's through Peter. The second misconception is that when he's given the keys, a lot of people, when they look at that, they go, oh, so I have to go through Peter. He's the one that is going to let me into heaven.
But Jesus is the door.
Jesus is the door. You can have the keys all day long, but if you never put it in the lock and turn the keys, the door will never open. That's just reality. Mm-hmm. And it's a very common misconception. And the reason, Luke, it's a common misconception is because nobody goes in. And I'm not trying to go at anybody here, but
everyone's wrong but us. That's not what we're saying.
That's not what we're saying at all. But if you crack open that Bible and you really start to read it, it's all going to start to click. Mm. It's all going to, you're finally going to go, oh, wait a minute. That makes sense.
The Bible is its own best commentary.
Yeah.
That's foundational statement.
Disclaimer right here for you. It matters nothing what I say, what Luke says, what any book says, what any commentary says, what any preacher says. None of it is going to get you into heaven unless you look at that book yourself and obey directly from it.
The Bible is the word of God, period.
Period.
Nothing that we say is.
Yes. Hey, Luke.
Yeah.
On to your second point, my man.
Oh, it's my turn again. Okay. End of Matthew chapter 23. This is a bigger jump, but we're going to chapter 23. This is towards the end. So chapter 21 is called the triumphal entry, or one of the things that happens in chapter 21 is called the triumphal entry, which is Jesus entering Jerusalem for the last time. This is where he rides on a donkey. People are throwing palm branches down. People are putting their coats in front of him. People are singing Hosanna in the highest, and the Pharisees are ticked because they've been telling people for 3 years he's a con man. He's just trying to get your attention. We still have those keys. We're the ones that give you the access. Jesus comes in and is treated like the Messiah. And they don't like that at all. So what they start doing over the course of... This is a week out from the cross. This happens, I think, either the Sunday or the Monday before the crucifixion, which is that weekend. So for the rest of that week, the Pharisees already have it in their minds that they're going to put him to death, like, within a few days.
It's
the plan's already
that's
made.
happen. Yep.
Right. That was made back when Lazarus was raised from the dead. That's John chapter 11. We'll get there eventually. But they already have this plan in mind, right? Now they need an excuse. They're going to do it either way, but it would look a lot better if they had an excuse.
Yeah, to them, it's like the light bulb just went off.
Right.
Yeah.
So chapters 21 and 22 are largely the Pharisees and Sadducees trying to trip Jesus up. Let's catch him in his words. Let's force him to make a commitment that's either anti-Jew or anti-Rome, because if it's anti-Jew, then the people will turn on him. If it's anti-Rome, Rome will put down any challenger to the Caesar that they see. And Jesus continues to not dodge their questions, because he's not like trying to get out of the argument, but he continues to give better answers than they're expecting. Like, he continues to show up their expectations of what he's going to say.
And just imagine their frustration when he does that.
Yeah. Like,
because they'll probably...
On the fourth or fifth time, they're like, come
Right, they're going
on.
at him, and they're like, oh, we got him now. And then he says...
No.
Yeah, and then he says whatever it is that he says, and they go,
come on.
I thought we had him with that one.
Right. And then he gives them one. Psalm 110:11. He quotes it. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. And he says, David's writing this. If David is calling the Messiah his Lord, how is the Messiah his son? Because David's king. And they have like brain melt moment. Like
Well, you know, it's funny that you what do we do?
And that's like,
yeah,
mic drop.
Yeah, that's
like, if you guys are claiming to know everything about the Old Testament, about the Messiah that's coming. Here's this one, and they totally whiff. And he says, gotcha. So that's near the end of chapter 22. Chapter 23, he goes on the offensive. They've been on the offensive for 2 chapters now. They've been trying to trip him up. They've been trying to get him down. They've been trying to figure out a way to undo him. Chapter 23, Jesus goes on the offensive. And he says, actually, you've been calling me a hypocrite and a con man. Let's look at all the ways that you guys are hypocrites and con men. You're the kind of guys who will teach the law of Moses all day long but not lift a finger to help anybody. You're the kind of guys who measure out exact spices on the day that specific meals and specific sacrifices are prepared and have nothing on mercy and justice and faith, which are the reason that those specific rituals are there in the first place.
That's why they're in place.
Right, that's why we're here. You're the kinds of guys who claim to know everything in the Old Testament and have killed every prophet since the beginning in pursuit of your own agenda. That's who you guys are. So don't come to me talking about he's a hypocrite and a con man. He says it, I think, 7 times over the course of 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. And then, end of chapter 23. And these are the verses I wanted to key in on. Verses 37 through 39. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
All right, real quick before you get into it, because I can tell you really, really, really want to get into it. And this might be one of your points, and if I steal it, I'm so sorry.
Go for it.
For you I say, you shall see me no more till you say. Meaning, you're not saying it right now, but you're gonna.
Yep.
Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
You've been against me from the beginning.
Yeah.
You've been calling me a hypocrite and a con man when you are.
Yep.
You were really, really ticked when I came in and got the welcome of the Messiah like I was supposed to.
Because he is.
And this whole time you've been refusing to say, he is in the name of the Lord and he comes to be blessed.
Because people are already saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the... People are already saying that, but he's telling them...
And you're not going to say it now.
But you will.
But you're gonna.
Man.
And this is Jesus' last public statement.
Yep.
Like in Matthew, chapters 24 and 25 are with his disciples, and then 26 starts the Last Supper and crucifixion narrative. So this is the last thing he says publicly. And it's, you may not like me right now. You've been arguing this entire time that I'm not who I say I am.
But
just wait.
But you will.
Just wait.
All right.
Got him.
Yeah. But, so carry on. Yeah, go ahead.
But the other bigger point that I wanted to make is...
Sorry, my point wasn't big enough.
No. It was a good point. It was one of the ones I was going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But...
As long as it got said, right?
But picture the emotion in Jesus as he says this. Picture why he's saying... Because really, he's gone pretty hard on the offensive for like 30-something verses at this point. Like, he's been angry. And he's been showing everybody that he's angry. And you sort of have this tone shift here at the end where he goes from anger to frustration to just sorrow. Like, yes, he's angry at the people who have led people astray, but this is still Jerusalem. This is still the city of his chosen people. This is still the people that since the beginning, really since before time existed, right? He's always wanted to bring them in. He's always wanted to have a special relationship with his people. Even now, he's heartbroken because of the mercy that he can no longer extend to people who have gone too far.
Yeah.
That's just the heart of Jesus in a nutshell.
Yeah, because it's like, hey, you're the reason I'm here, and you don't want me.
Yeah.
That's gotta hurt.
Yeah. But it goes back to that thought from chapter 13. Even the Pharisees and the scribes and the Romans and the Sadducees and everybody who's involved in putting him on a cross is worth the shot of the cross existing.
Yeah.
It's tough, but that's how much Jesus loves people.
What I want to end on.
Yeah.
All right, so this is week 2 of the pod. Last week we gave you
Matthew part 1.
Matthew part 1. This is bonus episode.
Matthew part 2 ?
Matthew part 2. Tune in next week because we're going to give you Mark.
Just in one.
And it's just in one.
We actually got through Mark.
We're going to do it. Yeah, we're going to get through Mark. And so you get 3 episodes in a row. Pretty sweet. It's going to be rare, but pretty sweet. Really excited about this episode. I'm really excited about the next one. Really excited about all of Bible Valley.
Wow.
Whoa.
Goodness, man.
I promise I didn't have a stroke.
Valley Bible Studies.
I'm the one that came up with the name.
I know you did. ValleyBibleStudies.com.
We're excited about all of it. Please, if you haven't already, make sure you're following the socials.
The written studies on Matthew are up too on the website.
Oh, and
if
it's
you want
so
those.
good. Dude, I looked through it. It is so well done. Well done. So yeah, the written study is on the website already, ValleyBibleStudies.com. Check out TikTok, check out Instagram, check out Facebook. It's all there. It's all up and ready for you to see. And we're excited about getting more content up there for you.
1 book down, 26 to go.
We're excited for the journey, and we'll see you next week.